Shahnameh. So in today's session, instead of just continuing what we started 2 sessions ago about the content of Shahnameh, I would like to start a new topic and then return to the Shahnameh stories, because I would like to make sure that we cover this topic first, and second, this topic and the background that I'm going to give you is useful for the rest of our journey throughout the book. Even though I should tell you, and you already guessed, that we cannot cover the entire book, and that was never the intent. So I'm going to tell you important things about certain stories. So I'm going to perhaps cover the Pishdadian era, or the mythological part of the Shahnameh better, but I'm going to talk briefly about the heroic part and historic part as well. But that would be mainly the topic of the next session. But today I'm going to talk about Shahnameh editing. So, which sounds the most boring topic ever, but I promise that is a very interesting topic, in fact. So I'm going to tell you more about it. So, first of all, what's the idea of Shahnameh editing? So why do we even edit Shahnameh? And the answer to that is different from what the editor does in a magazine, for example. What an editor does is that it takes manuscript and just fixes things, makes it better. But that's not the intent here. So we are not even in the position to edit what Ferdowsi has said or to make it better. So that's not the idea. However, as you have already heard and learned, that over the year there have been changes to Shahnameh. Shahnameh is a 1,000-year book, and of course, many people over the years have made changes into parts of Shahnameh, and that's what we want to find and fix. That's the goal of Shahnameh editing. But let's first talk about why people even made changes to Shahnameh. So the first thing to basically the first culprit here is one single verse from Shahnameh itself. It's pretty interesting. There's a verse that says, "بود بیت 6 بار بیور هزار سخنهای شایسته و غمگسار." So I skipped the first verse first. The second verse, it basically talks about Shahnameh and the verses of Shahnameh, which says that these are the worthy and caring words and messages. So this is the idea of the second word. But obviously it's talking about the Shahnameh itself. And the first part of this verse, it talks about the number of verses. It says, "Shesh bar bivar hezar." Shesh, you all know this much from Persian language, I'm sure. Shesh means 6. And bivar is an old word. We do not use it anymore. But bivar means actually 10,000. So 6 times 10,000 makes it 60,000. However, that might say that, okay, oh yeah, there have been 60,000 verses in Shahnameh, and that's what Ferdowsi said. Were we not supposed to rely on whatever Ferdowsi says? So in fact, this is exactly what we did with his life, right? So whatever Ferdowsi says, this is what we can rely on about his life. However, there are multiple challenges here. This first challenge is that after these two words, shesh and bivar, 6 and 10,000, the next word is hezar, which means 1,000. 6 times 10,000 times 1,000. So that doesn't add up. It makes it 60 million. So what does that actually mean? So there are different interpretations into this. One of them says that actually bivar means 10. 10 times 6, 60 times 1,000, 60,000. However, we do not have much precedence or much other evidence that people actually use bivar as 10, not 10,000. So this is one interpretation. The other one is that, do not just read too much into it. So this is what Ferdowsi wanted to say about, oh, a big thing, a big number of verses. And in fact, 60 was a special number because this was a part of the numeric system, which was very popular back then, based on 60, not based on 10. So he wanted to make it a round number, and of course, a large number, which is actually not that far from the number of verses. So that's another interpretation. And the third thing we can, and in fact, so we also see that, for example, not Daghiri, but Asadi Tusi in Shahnameh, which I talked about last time. Remember, I told you the story of Jamshid and what he did during that 100 years that he was a fugitive. So that's in the Shahnameh, the story of Shah's Krasaspa, the biggest hero of Iran outside Shahnameh. So that's in that book. In that book, he talks about Bivar, and in that, even Bivar Hazar, 10,000 times 1,000, referring to the number of soldiers, for example. It doesn't make sense, not millions of soldiers. It's just, obviously, it's an exaggerated number. So this is the way he uses it. Another thing that people argue about this is that this is actually not a real verse. This is not from Shahnameh. This is one of the additions to Shahnameh. And we also have another verse which also refers to I think 6 and Bivar, 60,000. Another part of Shahnameh which is already refuted. We already know that one is especially an addition. This one might not be. So anyway, so what does all of that mean? So why am I emphasizing that much on this verse? Because here is what people wanted to do. People wanted to find 60,000 verses. So in the 14th century, there was a person named Hamdullah Mustafi. This person can be considered the first editor of Shahnameh. 14th century, about 600 years ago, almost 400 years after Ferdowsi. About 400 years after Ferdowsi, and about 600 years ago. So this gentleman has a book that he actually wanted to continue the work of Ferdowsi. He said that Ferdowsi has, and he had so much respect for Ferdowsi, by the way. He described him and praised him a lot. And as part of he has a book in which he says that Ferdowsi told the story of Iran from the beginning all the way to the end of the Sasanian era, to the time of that Arabs conquered Iran. And now I'm going to continue that. He continued this story of Iran from his own perspective, from the time that Islam entered Iran up to the time that he lived, which was about 800 years after that. So this is not an important part of his work. His work is not that important or that great. So people do not pay much attention to that part. Maybe from the historic perspective, people might be looking into that. So I have not seen much on it. But the one important thing is that, as I mentioned, he talks about Ferdowsi himself, and he added many verses of Shahnameh on the side of his book, which is actually a good reference for people who are actually doing the Shahnameh editing today as well, because all the Shahnameh editing work is based on the manuscripts, what we have from many ages ago. So from, as I mentioned, the first Shahnameh, the oldest Shahnameh that we have today is from 200 years after Ferdowsi, which is a bummer, which is that's a sad part. However, that one is still 800 years old manuscript. So they are looking into these kind of manuscripts, 800 years old, 700, 600, maybe 500 years old. These are the first few manuscripts that are left behind. All right, actually we have found so far, and these are the valuable ones. So I'll talk about more about those. What are those Shahnamehs? However, this basically Hamdullah Mustafi's book also is kind of one of those. because it's very old, and it also writes some of these verses. And he's not the only person. There have been other um, authors or even poets who have referenced Shahnameh's um, verses uh, in their books, and that is a reference. And one of them is Nizami Aruzi that I talked about. Remember, I talked about Nizami Aruzi, who has all these stories about Ferdowsi life. I spent a good amount of time on that. He also referenced and mentioned a few verses of Shahnameh himself, and that is a source. We can think about that when we reach those verses in Shahnameh, we can compare to see, okay, if we have 10 different versions or 10 different manuscripts that we look at. I think Dr. Khalid Mutlaq, I think, used 14 or 15 different old manuscripts that he selected, and then we can say that, oh, on these verses, this is maybe the 16th one that we can look into. So anyway, this is one of the things that Hamdullah Mustafi also did. He wrote a lot of verses of Shahnameh in his book. But he has interesting, he's one of the people who has actually give us the evidence that people were looking for 60,000 verses. He says that everybody talks about 60,000 verses. However, at this era, at this moment in time, I have not found more than 50,000. 50 versus 60. 50 is the right number. We know that today. In fact, if you look at different Shahnameh editions today, so Khalaqi Mutlaq, Moscow edition, or some other versions, there are 49, 4950, 500, something like that. It's close to 50,000, not 60. Hamdullah Mustafi says that, okay, everybody says 60, but I do not find more than 50. And then he believed that it is his job to find the 10,000 lost verses. That's what he and many others did. That's why they were looking for verses. They were looking for stories from other authors, other poets, and they included them in Shahnameh. That's why we see many stories in several manuscripts or even editions that are not actually part of the Ferdowsi's boards. They are by others. Last time I mentioned that we have many names. It's not Shahnameh only. Garshas Name was one of them. And I told you that, okay, that is also one story about the story of Jamshid, and then the story of Garshas, which is missing from Shahnameh. Ferdowsi has not written all this history of Iran, or basically the oral history, or the stories, the historical stories or mythological stories of Iran. Other people have done that as well. Ferdowsi just had a reference, and in his reference, these were the stories. But we have Banu Gushasm Name, we have Sam Name, Faramarz Name, and many other names, Bahman Name. So these are the stories of other people, and a lot of stories for each one of these heroes mainly. So those are the stories that they sometimes are grabbed from those references and are added into Shahnameh. We have a Shahnameh today, Shahnameh manuscript today, that has 166,000 verses. It's crazy. 166,000, not 66, 166,000 verses. And this is another based on another tradition that existed back then. People were collecting all the stories of the ancient Iran from anywhere, any sources that they found. Imagine that they included the entire Faramarz Name and Bahman Name and Salnam and all of the others. They put it all together in a book. They called it Shahnameh, right? It's a story that's mainly around shahs, kings. And then it was also customary to name somebody who's the most famous or has the most verses on the book. They did not care about just copyright and things like that. So they named it by somebody. That's why we have a book called Shahnameh of Ferdowsi, and that has these many verses. So anyway, this is one reason that people were looking for verses left and right, and they added it to it. There are other reasons as well. There are three main reasons that I want to mention. But before that, there are one of the scholars of Shahnameh, Mr. Feridun Junaidi in Iran, who's also so much into Shahnameh editing. He has his own opinions on things. And as a result of that, he has basically eliminated 2/3 of Shahnameh. He says that all of these are editions. So there are not that many verses from Ferdowsi. All the others are editions. And he has his own reasons on, and many scholars do not believe in what he says. He's a very good scholar of Pahlavi, and he's a great gentleman. But he has his own opinions on verses, and as a result of that, he eliminated a lot of verses. However, one of the things he says, he basically argues that there are these many additions to Shahnameh, is because people were paid based on the number of verses they wrote, especially those transcribers. They got paid based on that, and that's why they even basically recited or just added some verses from themselves. They were great poets, apparently, or they basically found it from other places and just added them. That's his perspective. However, besides this argument, which is not very strong, it might be true, but that should not be the reason for 30 plus thousand verses being additive. That's not a very solid argument. However, there are three main reasons that the scholars today believe that there were reasons people added verses to Shahnameh. The first one is or actually, let me just tell you first this. It's not just about adding verses, it's about changing Ferdowsi's words in general. So why the Shahnameh that we have today? There are many different versions. We have many manuscripts, and out of them, basically, as I mentioned, Dr. Khalaqi, for example, selected 15 out of them. So there are more than that. But they said, oh, this one is similar to that, this one is similar to that. So he basically collected, he candidated one of them out of a cluster of books, imagine. And then he picked another one, and now 15 ones which are old enough and maybe different enough that he could study. And the same thing was done by others who did Shahnameh edition, Shahnameh editing, including the Moscow team that I talked about. So, but when you look at all these manuscripts, they are very different. So they have differences. And there are 4 different types of differences that we need to pay attention to. The first one is that they have different words. So you see the same verse that in one manuscript has a couple of words replaced with another one. The second common change is the order of the verses. In some Shahnamehs, you see that, oh, some verses are on top, some of them are just a few verses below. So they are misplaced. And the third one is additions. That's the one adding verses to Shahnameh. That's the one that I was talking about so far. And the fourth one is omissions, missing baits or verses, or missing stories. I gave you one example of stories that might be one of the stories that were omitted later, the story of Sadeh celebration. Not everybody believes it as such, but I'm one of those people. In fact, I thought of it myself, that due to these evidence, due to people like Imam Muhammad Ghazali and other clerics who were against these kind of celebrations and festivals, including Sadeh and Mehregan and Nowruz. So maybe people preferred to skip this part of the book because he was talking about those celebrations. So maybe that's one reason that these omissions happened. And there are other omissions from some of the manuscripts as well. So anyway, so these are the 4 different changes to Shahnameh. But let me get back to the reasons that people make these changes. There are 3 main reasons that people talk about. One is updating words. Ferdowsi is a 1,000-year book. And many of the, even though the Persian language is still the same language as we people spoke 1,000 years ago, and that's why we still understand Shahnameh. However, some of the words are old. Some of the words are not common today. And let me just give you one example. This is one famous verse from Shahnameh. Maybe many of you remember that. توانا بود هر که دانا بود ز دانش دل پیر برنا بود. This is a very famous verse. It's very beautiful and powerful. It says that whoever is knowledgeable is powerful. Knowledge is power. This is the first part of this verse. This is exactly توانا بود هر که دانا بود. Whoever is knowledgeable is powerful. And the second part says, ز دانش دل پیر برنا بود. The heart of the old will be young with knowledge, with knowledge. It's very beautiful. But the reason I mentioned this verse was because of one word, borna. All of the words that are in this this verse, they're all common today, except one, which is borna. We say javan today, young. Young means javan. Oh, he's javan, he's young. But borna was a common word back then. And in fact, so many people know the word borna means javan thanks to just this verse from Shahnameh. This is one way, for example, the Persian language is preserved because, for example, this word might have been lost throughout the ages if it was not in this verse. And Borna, by the way, is a very popular boy's name today because of this, right? But I give you this example to show you that in different verses of Shahnameh, sometimes some of the words are old. And then when time passes, let's say that, for example, 200, 300 years after Ferdowsi, I call these guys, these people transcribers. I don't know what is the right term. So the people who actually read from something and write it somewhere else. So these are the people who basically copied books by hands. I don't know if you know a better word, please suggest. Otherwise, I call them transcribers. So they're transcribing from maybe copiers. So I don't know, maybe copier word might be the better term. Anyway, when they did this, when they reached a word which was not common in their time, they actually replaced it with a better word, but from their sense, with a more common word. And that's why over the ages, we see that words are replaced and people, so people understand it better. And that happened over and over again. That's why one of the methods of Shahnameh editing today, the editors use this method, is that if they look at two different copies and they see that two words are different in the two verses, they pick the older one based on this rationale. They said, oh, this one is more authentic because this word is has more history or older than the other word, which obviously is a replacement. So that's one kind of changes to Shahnameh. One reason for changing Shahnameh, to make it, to update it. And believe it or not, some people even thought that, okay, they know it better than Ferdowsi. So, this is not beautiful. Let me just replace it with this, not even word, just phrase to make it more beautiful. That's what they did. And this is one of the things about, for example, one particular manuscript from Shahnameh, which, believe it or not, is the oldest complete copy of Shahnameh manuscript, which is in London Museum, British Museum in London. From so all of these, let me just do some calculation here. This is from 675, but in the Islamic calendar. So I usually added 621 with it, from 1296, even though this is not accurate because this was lunar calendar not solar. So take off a few years. Let's say that 1250, something like that. Around that time, it's still 750 years or 800 years old, something like that, right? So this manuscript is transcribed or copied by somebody who was actually pretty good. He was a very talented person, and he had very good taste, and he changed things left and right to make things better. Even though this is the oldest complete book that we have from Shahnameh, but this is one of the problems we have. So one of the scholars, Dr. Khatibi, has this paper on this. It's called The Good Taste Copier and the Trouble of the Editor. So that's the problem. He changes things, and now we don't know actually which one, even though we see that. So that's why we cannot rely on the oldest manuscript. Otherwise, we said, oh, all the others are newer. Let's just take the oldest. That one seems to be the right one. No. So do we have another one which is, let's say, maybe 50 years old, newer than the other one. However, this is more solid because the copier got it from another old manuscript, which was more authentic than the one that this guy just changed on his own. So that's another reason that people do this. However, the second reason for changing Shahnameh is pretty funny, is emotional changes. What does that mean? What it means is that the copier or whoever that is narrated, sometimes even some people narrated it, the other guy transcribed it. So that could be also maybe teamwork. So who knows who was to blame. Anyway, so at some point they thought that actually this is not emotionally rich. I need to make it better. And they added verses. Like what? For example, we know the story of Rostam and Sohrab. Rostam kills his own son, and then he cries over his dead body. But maybe for 5 verses, 10. Wait a minute, he killed his own son. That's not enough. He needs to cry more. So they add more. Or they look at as one part of Shahnameh where, for example, Rostam brags about himself and talking to his rival and said, oh, I'm the greatest hero of Iran, blah, blah. But maybe 2 verses now, come on, let him say a bit more. These are the emotional additions that people do. So to make it more dramatic, that's another reason. However, these are the two not very important or impactful changes to Shahnameh. These reasons are innocent changes. Oh, yeah, let him just add a few verses, just bragging or crying or whatever, or just changing the words, updating the words. The third reason for that people change Shahnameh, this is the impactful one, and this is the one that we maybe it's a main reason that we need to edit Shahnameh, and that is that people made ideological changes to Shahnameh. They change Shahnameh in a way that make it aligned with their own ideology. That's why we cannot easily say what was Ferdowsi's religion today, because there are verses added left and right, here and there, praising this guy, praising that guy. We don't know which one of them is real, even though, again, through the same system, through the same logic and comparing manuscripts, we try to find something, figure out something. However, nobody can say for sure. There are many manuscripts today that based on that have these verses praising Prophet Muhammad. So people say that, okay, Ferdowsi was Muslim according to this, and in fact it's true. If we rely on whatever we have today, what is left today, we can say for sure that he was Muslim, because we have no manuscript, no old important manuscript today that does not have such verses. There are many that have many more verses. For example, praising the 4 caliphs, the first caliphs, Abu Bakr, Omar, Osman, and Ali. Some people believe that the first three are additions. Remember I told you that. So if you just take Muhammad's cousin, who was Ali, the fourth caliph, you are Shia. But if you believe it in the four of them, then you are Sunni. And that's why I gave you an example about Attar, that basically people just removed some of the verses praising those first three caliphs to make him Shia, even though we know that Attar was a Sunni, was a very religious person, but he was a Sunni person, right? So that's why we have these verses added. But we can say he was Muslim based on just these verses from these manuscripts, which the oldest one of them is 200 years after Ferdowsi's death. So that's why we can never say for sure, because who knows what happened during these 200. Maybe these verses, which are very popular and they're everywhere, praising Muhammad, they were added during these 200 years. Maybe Zoroastrians would like to think that. But there might be other reasons that we believe that Ferdowsi was Muslim. So obviously his name was Muslim. So I told you there's several names that they come up with, Hassan, Ahmad. We don't even know what was actually his first name, but all of these are a religious name. There are Islamic names. And the second is that it was really hard for him at that time to be a Zoroastrian and do all of these, and then have people just come in and just take in his words and let him live a carefree life. So if you are a Zoroastrian, you could have lived back there. So it was not like Zoroastrians were killed. So it was just 4th century after all of these killings. The killings hadn't stopped. Zoroastrians were not killed. However, many clerics at that point, if you were not a Muslim, they could have accused you of promoting Zoroastrianism or anything like that. So that's why. So usually when we argue about things like this, we look at the whole picture, including Shahnameh itself. But religion is one of the examples that I told you. So people added verses to make Ferdowsi's religion align with himself. By the way, so it's not just about Muslim, not Muslim. So we have many different versions of Islam. And even as part of Shia or Sunni, we have multiple versions. Hanbali, Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, Zaydi. All of these are different types. Like, for example, we have different denominations here in the Christianity. Same story. So that's why even just adding one verse praising a guy or giving a hint about the view of Ferdowsi could have made him one of those, because these are minor differences between them, right? But it's just religion. There are other things that people added to Shahnameh for their ideology. So it might be crazy to think about it today, but some people were against women. They added verses which scolded women or showed that they were inferior. So there are some of them are really insulting verses that we know today for sure, for fact, they were not Ferdowsi's words. So one of them is زن و اژدها در هر دو در خاک به جهان پاک از این هر دو ناپاک به. I apologize to the ladies if I just say what he says, because everybody many people just narrate this verse and they attributed that to Ferdowsi. By the way, this is not from Ferdowsi. It's very clear. We know that today. But this is the meaning of this verse. So that both women and dragons better be in underground. And the whole world should be cleaned from these two. Or cleared from these two. Very insulting. This is not Ferdowsi's words, but people added that. And there are other verses in Shahnameh, by the way. Some of them exist, but they were, first of all, they're not that insulting. The second one is that is not Ferdowsi's words. They were words from different characters of Shahnameh. One example is from Esfandiar. Esfandiar, the son of Goshtas, when when his father sends him to fight Rustam, not actually fight Rustam, to tie his hand and just bring him to the court, which actually leads to his death because Rustam does not accept that. So before going there, Esfandiar talks to his mom. His mom, Katayun, just gives him advice. She tells him not to do that. She says, Rostam is a great hero of Iran, and he has done so much for Iran. You should not do that. And Rostam is a great hero, and he's very powerful. You will not be able to convince him, and you will get killed. Don't do that. So she gives him advice, but Svandiar in response said that, I don't want your advice. What do women know about war, about anything? So obviously this is an insulting verse, but it's from Esfandiar, is not from Ferdowsi. People take that from Shahnameh, said that, see what Ferdowsi said? No, Ferdowsi didn't say that. It's like, for example, all the bad words that enemies of Iran say about Iran. Are these Ferdowsi's words? No. Ferdowsi talks from his own side as well in Shahnameh a lot. I told you about that. But that's not all the Shahnameh, right? It's just, these are just very small portion. I mentioned something about Ferdowsi's view on Arabs, which is kind of non-existent. Ferdowsi does not himself say bad about Arabs, but one of the basically the army commander of Iran, Rostam Farrokhzad, says a lot bad things about Arabs as part of his letter to his brother before going to Qadisiyah, to the war with Arabs. Of course, we might say that Ferdowsi was shrewd, and then he actually added that. And now that, let me just open a parenthesis here. And now I remember that something that I mentioned about Zahhak last time that I forgot to mention, this important fact. So remember that as part of the Zahhak story, we said that he was an Arab, right? Coming from the Arab region. And some believe, like Noldeke, one of the greatest scholars of Shahnameh, one of the giants of this field, he says that, oh, look at Ferdowsi, how shrewd he was to make the most evil person of Shahnameh an Arab, because he hated Arabs. So there are many issues with this argument. One is that, as I mentioned, Ferdowsi has the reference. Whatever it was in his reference, he mentioned that. So most probably it was in his reference, most probably. But so he could not have narrated the entire thing and says that, okay, if I miss one word, my soul will be suffering, will be guilty. I told you about that. So how dedicated he was to cover his reference so accurately. But the other thing is that I told you that we have Zahhak in Avesta, right? Ajidahak, that dragon. In that verse from Aban Yasht, it says that Ajidahak from Babylon. And Babylon, we know that today is the region close to Saudi Arabia. It's in Iraq, right? So comes from the Arab word. So in fact, that might be the reason, right? So it just matches what we have historically about Zahhak. So anyway, so let me just get back. So I just wanted to mention that this is something that some people believe that is addition, but it's not. So it could quite have been from the Arab world. Anyway, so that's one ideological conversation that people have, and maybe added things bad about Arabs here and there. And in fact, this keeps happening even today. So most of you are not connected to the Persian social media these days, which is crazy. You see people write things, write beautiful poems, and at the end of that, they attribute it, give credit to one of the famous Persian poets. We have contemporary poets like Feridun Moshiri and Sohrab Sepehri. You read beautiful poems today in social media, which is at the end says, "Oh, by Sohrab Sepehri." No, it's not by him. Sohrab Sepehri had this much book, and we know all this poems by him, and this is not one of them. And this is one of the big questions to me: that why do they do this when somebody says such a beautiful poem? Why do they add someone else's name? There are answers to that. There are hypotheses. One of them is that actually this poor guy put his own name on it. And one of the people who forwarded it in social media decided that no, this is not him. This is Sohrab Sepehri, because this few words in that is very similar to what Sohrab said. So they changed names, and in fact, this is one of the common problems that we have today. And I am one of those people who actually correct people left and right on this, and people do not even like it, believe it or not, on social media. So one of the famous poems, very popular poems these days, is a poem praising Nowruz, Persian New Year. نوروز بمانید که ایام شمایید، آغاز شمایید و سرانجام شمایید. It's very beautiful. It says, stay Nowruz. It's pretty interesting. Stay Nowruz. He's talking to you. It says, stay Nowruz. نوروز بمانید که ایام شمایید. Because you are the days. آغاز شمایید و سرانجام شمایید. You are the beginning and you are the end. You are everything that it is about Nowruz. This is this poem. Is very beautiful. I wish I could tell you that. So we basically sang that as part of our choir. I can give you the link if I remember. So our choir performed this. I composed the song on this, and our choir performed. So I do this kind of things as well on the side. Anyway, so this is very beautiful poem by a lady in Australia. Piraye Yaghmai. Everybody knows her. She's a pretty good poet. And in fact, her nephew is here in Seattle with us. So, but you see this beautiful poem about Nowruz all over the internet today, attributed to Rumi, Molavi. Because the style kind of likes his. And people say, "Oh, come on, this is very good. It should be Rumi. It's not a contemporary poet." People do that. And when I tell them about this, they do not believe me. If you want to find the right poet for this poem, you need to go to the second page of Google search engine. Because all of it, when you put this in your weblog, and then that gets basically crawled by the search engine at the end, said, "Oh, what is the popular, what's the common belief in this poem?" Yeah, everybody says that is Molavi, is Rumi, then this by him. That's the kind of challenges we have today. It's even hard to find the actual poet of some of these poems, because people change that. Now, getting back to the topic, so there are many beautiful but insulting poems that are attributed to Ferdowsi against Arabs because of today's ideology that people have, because of all the things that are happening in Iran. Some people who are very hardline, religious, Islamic, who we know about on the left side. On the other side, we have people who are against it, and they want to say that we hate Arabs because of all the things that happened to us in the past 14th century. And then Ferdowsi was also against them. They need that, right? They don't want to just be blamed as racist. They say, "Oh, it's not my word. Look at what Ferdowsi said." But no, this is not Ferdowsi's. Ferdowsi did not say that. So that's what's happening today. Now you can imagine that over the past 1,000 years, all of these happened as well. And people changed Ferdowsi's word, added to it because of the ideological reasons. So, uh, so let me tell you briefly about the about the history of Shahnameh editions. So we have these manuscripts, yes. So they were pretty old. They all. Let me briefly tell you about these manuscripts first, and then the Shahnameh editions. The oldest manuscript we have is from. Again, let's just do some calculations, even though this is not accurate because it's lunar. Then I can convert it to Gregorian or today's calendar, Western calendar. Is from I think 614 on the Islamic lunar calendar plus 621, roughly around 1200, and which is, remember, is about 200 years after Ferdowsi. That's the oldest one, but unfortunately, it's not even complete. It has half of Shahnameh. The other half is not there, and is now in Florence, Italy. And they found it in 1978. They found it in that library by accident. For the longest time, they believed that this is a copy of Quran. People did not even know what is Persian, what is Arabic. They thought that, oh, this is a copy of Quran. And somebody by accident looked at it. Wait a minute, this is Shahnameh. Oh, wow, this is so old. And this is the oldest. They found it like that. It's 1978. One of the most popular and respectable editions of Shahnameh is Shahnameh of Moscow, which was created by a group of scholars, Iranians and Russians, back in 60s, 1960 up to 1971 or something like that. And before Dr. Khaleqi's edition, Moscow edition was the most reliable one that everybody used. But this one was even published before this new manuscript was found, before the oldest Shahnameh manuscript. That's why, for example, Dr. Khaleqi Mutlaq relied heavily on this Shahnameh because it's pretty old, and one of his main manuscripts as part of his edition. So obviously new data came about, and then he used that one in his own edition, which was missing back in Moscow edition. But the newly found, the newest manuscript that was found, one of those ancient manuscripts, not the oldest, but one of those old ones is found in is in Beirut. In Beirut, and it was found 10 years ago. 10, 12 years ago. And that one does not have a date, but people believe that it was from maybe 250 years to 300 years after Ferdowsi. That's another source, right? Another manuscript. And that's why, for example, there's a lady scholar, Mehri Behfar, who's doing Shahnameh editing today. She's still working on it. She's in the middle, not in the middle. So maybe up to, kind of 1/3 of Shahnameh that she has finished. She's still working on it. But this is also one of the manuscripts that she is referencing. She's relying on for her edition. So anyway, these are the way that manuscripts are used. So the manuscripts today we have usually have the name of a city in them. So this name comes from the place that this manuscript is currently located, and it's perhaps the place that it was found in, one of the libraries. The oldest one is from Florence, Italy. And then we have London, and we have another copy from London. We have one in Cairo, one in Beirut, one in Istanbul. We have two in Moscow. So this is why you see that, in Shahnameh of Cairo says this. Oh, Shahnameh of Istanbul says that. So these are unfortunately, most of them are outside Iran. Anyway, so these are the main sources of Shahnameh editing. However, these are not the only sources. There are other ways we can other means we have for editing Shahnameh. There are two books that I want to talk about. I mentioned things like, for example, the book of Hamdullah Mustawi which has some of the verses of Shahnameh. Of course, we have some books like this that we refer to, as long as they are old enough. However, there are two other interesting books that are relied on today. One of them is the translation of Shahnameh to Arabic by somebody named Bondari Esfahani. And that one is pretty old. It's from 621 lunar calendar. 621 plus 621 again. Yeah, actually, yeah, from 20, something like that. Because I convert from lunar to solar. Right? That is pretty old. One of the oldest, besides Florence, this is the oldest. But it's in Arabic. But that is still used. You cannot identify exact same verses, but you can learn a lot. If you see, for example, in one of the if you compare two manuscripts, one of them says that, oh, for Rostam, for example, hit this guy with his mace. And then the other one doesn't say that. If you see that the Arabic version has this one, then you say that actually it was in translation because he translated it. That's one of the means of Shahnameh editing today. That's one of the things we refer to because we have that tool. But that's not easy to use, by the way, because his translation is not complete. And he kind of even shortened it, summarized it. And we have the same problem with Dr. Davis, Dick Davis's version in English. He also shortened things and he skipped a few stories. This happens usually in translations. And that's why we cannot rely 100% sure, but it's still a tool. The other one is, this one is very interesting one, is a book called Shahnameh or Qurur al-Sayr of Muluk al-Fars or something like that. It's again in Arabic. It's called Shahnameh of Sa'alabi. Somebody named Sa'alabi did that in the 10th or 11th century. Wrote a Shahnameh. 10th or 11th century plus 600 again is maybe, yeah, 1600. So it's not that old, but it's a very important reference. Why? Because it's not a translation of Shahnameh Ferdowsi. It's the translation of Shahnameh of Abu Mansur, the reference of Ferdowsi, which we no longer have. But he translated that into Arabic. So that's one reason that we believe that Ferdowsi had that reference and you relied on that reference, because many of the stories are identical or very close to identical between the two books. It means that Ferdowsi wrote that from the same reference that Sa'alabi had. Sa'alabi says that, okay, this is a translation of Shahnameh of Abu Mansur. And we have problems with that as well. Some of them is missing. Some of them is shortened. So we have that problem. But again, is yet another tool. I told you about Mr. Feridun Junaidi, who has an edition of Shahnameh, and he believes that 2/3 of Shahnameh is editions, I told you. However, in the introduction of his book, he mentions 27 different methods for Shahnameh editing. 27, including the languages that you need to be familiar with. Obviously, Persian language and Pahlavi. Pahlavi, the Middle Persian language. He is pretty good he's a scholar of Middle Persian language. And he says that if you want to do Shahnameh editing, you need to be familiar with that language because many of the words come from that, have that roots, many of the words which are not common today. But if you know the Middle Persian roots, then you can tell better whether this word is right or not. And then he says that, okay, you need to be familiar with even Arabic. Other methods that he has is he relies on even knowing the rules and customs of the ancient times. He said that you need to be familiar with the rules of war back then, or even celebrations, or parties, feasts. So we read in Shahnameh a lot about this, about the way that feasts are done, or about the way that people went to the king's courts and the rules that they followed to respect the king properly, for example. He says that you need to know that so that you can analyze these verses to know that, oh, some of them are not quite right because this is not the custom of the way that it should have been. These are good. These are good tools. He said that even you need to know about war, about war weapons, how they were used. There are many different weapons that are referenced in Shahnameh. Obviously, Shahnameh talks a lot about wars and fights and battles. And the tools of battle are warfare. He talks about mace, about sword, and about archery, and just all of these things. There are different tools that people used. He says that you should be familiar with those. You should be familiar with horses and how horse riding was done. Some of these verses are not quite right on that front. But again, as a result of this one, unfortunately, he refused and just eliminates many of the verses of Shahnameh. I give you one example that I believe that he might not have been quite right there. He says that we have Dehim. Dehim is one of the words that are used, usually say Dehim Shahanshah. Dehim is something that is like a crown that noble people, and especially and kings, put on their head. He says that Dehim was brought to Iran by Greeks. So all the kings who were before Alexander's attack. So all of these famous kings that we talk about, including Kumar, Samurez, Jamshid, Hushang, all of these, and then even Kekawus, Kekhosro, Gushtas, all of these were before Alexander, right? So he says that if you see a reference to Dehim for any of these people before Alexander, this is not by Ferdowsi, is added, is wrong, and is not a good verse. Is added by somebody who was he did not know this fact. However, I personally believe that Ferdowsi himself did not know this fact. Who knew the history of Dehim? Why should have Ferdowsi known it? So if Dehim was a common word, it was used by the Dehim is not a crown; it's just a cloth, a type of cloth that they wrapped around their head. This is the way that he removes some of the verses which should not be done, in my opinion. So he's too orthodox on this, and he should have been a bit more flexible. Anyway, so these are, he talks about a lot more tools that we have for editing Shahnameh. But let me just talk about the editions of Shahnameh as well, so you know about them as well. The first edition of Shahnameh was done by somebody called Lumsden. It was in Calcutta, India, in 1811. He planned to publish the entire Shahnameh. Remember that, but when we say first edition, which means that's the first printed version. Before that, they were all handwritten manuscripts. He decided to publish them. He typed them and then published them. He planned to do that in 8 different volumes, but he did only one of them, the first one. So that's why we do not rely on his work much. And even on that first book, he did not even mention how it was done. What was his reference? He says that, I had references, but how he decided which one of the verses to pick from these, it was not that clear. So we skip his thing. The first manuscript was that we know today. It was done in 1829 by somebody called Turner McCann. That is commonly known as Makan today. And he was also in India. He was a British officer in India. And he started that. He did that based on 17 manuscript copies. And then after him, between 1838 and 1878, there was an edition in Paris by a French scholar named Julius Van Mould. We call him Jules Mould, or Jules Mould, some people say. So his edition was based on 30 manuscripts. And he was, and after he died in 1876, the last of the 7 volumes that he was supposed to do was done by another person, Maynard. It was his successor. And then after that, this version was eventually completed in Iran. It's called Shahnameh of I forgot. I mentioned that last time. So this is the one that was created during the time of the millennium celebration of Ferdowsi, 1000th anniversary of Bruchim. Oh, I never remember that. Shahnameh Bruchim. This is that Shahnameh is. And then after him, there was another one called Dabir Siaghi, was by Professor Dabir Siaghi. And then it was Moscow. Moscow was the first very reliable Shahnameh because it was done in a scientific way. It was based on comparing these and then rely on evidences, rely on which one that was the oldest and which one was more common among, which verse was more common among all the different manuscripts. So he was done, they did a pretty good job. However, they took things wrong as well. Said there are a few stories in that Shahnameh which are not by Ferdowsi. I want to talk about a few of them if we have time, maybe 10 more minutes, if you guys are okay. So, and this is the part that I want to basically wrap this topic with a few examples from Shahnameh. But before that, as I mentioned, after Shahnameh of Moscow, we have Shahnameh of Dr. Khalaqi Mutlaq. He spent about 40 years of his life to this, and he also have multiple editions of this book that he basically revised over the years as, for example, new manuscript was discovered. Even manuscript of Beirut is also used, I think, in his latest version. He's still working on that, but Mehri Befar is another one, another lady who's working on this one, and Feridun Junaidi and others. Anyway, so this is the story of all different editions that exist today. Edition by Dr. Khalaqi Mutlaq, this red one, which obviously is filtered. You do not help. So this one is the one that I use and I rely on. But let me give you a few examples of how things were added. Shahnameh. As part of that, I'm continuing the storytelling of Shahnameh. Remember that? So I wanted to tell you that story. But let me skip the story of Zahak and Feridun. I get back to that. And go into the story of, after Feridun, we have the story of Manucher. Manucher was Iraj's grandson. So you know that story, that Iraj was killed by his 2 brothers, this Salman too. These 3 were the sons of Feridun. The 2 killed the youngest son, and after him, his grandson Manucher basically killed those 2 in revenge, and then became the king of Iran. The story of Manucher is the story of Zal. So this is one thing we need to know about Shahnameh. Shahnameh is not all the stories of kings. They are not the stories of common people. You do not hear much about common people, but it's a story of kings and heroes. Heroes of Shahnameh, like Rostam is the most famous one, but we have many others. So Gudars, Tus, Kiv, and all others. These are the heroes of Iran, and we have their stories as well. The story of Manucher's reign is mainly the story of the Sam's family. Sam, Zal, and then Rostam. Rostam is born in the era of Manucher. But before that, we have the story of Zal himself. And Zal was the white-haired son of Sam. When he was born, he had white hair. The father didn't like it. He put him in the mountains to die. And then Seymour found him, raised him. And when he was a teenager, people some heard that actually his son is alive, and he goes after him. He apologizes to him and he praises Seymour and takes Zal back to his own palace. And then since from then, Zal gets education, learns about all the war uh, skills, and then he becomes a very skillful hero of Iran. And then this is just a short first part of that story. But the longer version part of that story is the story of Zal's love with Rudabe, the daughter of the king of Kabul, the ruler of Kabul, Mehrab. And this is a very beautiful love story, one of the most beautiful love stories I've ever heard. And this is why Shahnameh is not only about battles. It's not all about wars. We have stories like Zal and Rudabe, which is beautiful. So these two fall in love without seeing each other, by just overhearing each other's stories. And then they secretly plan to meet each other. And even that part is very beautiful. The way that they make this secret rendezvous. So I do not have time to talk about it, but it's very beautiful. And then they two meet on the rooftop of Rudabe's palace, and they pledge to each other that they marry. However, there's a big challenge, and that challenge is that the king of Iran, Manouchehr, of course, would not approve. Why? Why not? Because Rudabe is a descendant of Zahak. His father, Mehrab, is a descendant of Zahak. So this is a bit odd that this story is from Kabul. Kabul is in the east of Iran, but Zahak is from the west. How that happened, who knows? Anyway, that's the story. And then Manouchehr's grand-grandfather, Feridun, was the person who defeated Zahak. So Manouchehr is worried that if these two marry, from this marriage, a son is born that wants to take the throne back. He wants his family, Zahak's family, to rule. And this is what he's worried about. And they know that. So that's why when Zal asked his father for his blessing, Sam says that no. So I cannot accept this. But then Zal makes him an argument, makes him an offer he cannot refuse, makes him an offer, basically reminds his father that when he apologized to him at the foothill of the mountain for all the bad things that he did, he left him, he abandoned him in the mountain. He said, remember then, you told me that I will grant you any wish that you have for the rest of your life. I'm going to give you whatever you want. This is what I want. I want to marry this girl. So father cannot say anything. Sam says, okay, but let me go talk to the king. He goes to the king. He goes to the palace to talk to Manouchehr. Manouchehr has already heard about this relationship, this secret relationship, and he's not happy. So when Sam goes there, he does not even give a chance for Sam to ask why he even showed up. He tells him, oh, I'm glad that you are here. I have a mission for you. Go to Kabul, burn it, and kill everybody. Because I don't want anybody from Zahak's descent to exist. I don't want that. Go kill them. And Sam says, okay, sure, I'll go do that. Sam does not even dare to disagree or protest or anything. He goes and he wants to go to war. But now two things happen here. So there are two people who decide to take action. One of them, of course, is Zal himself. Zal goes to his father and tells him that, okay, you want to go and burn Kabul and kill everybody? Kill me first.
if you want to do that. And this part of the story is beautiful. It's very strong verses. That he says that you are coming here from the capital here to ruin my life. Why are you doing that to me? So everybody's happy about you, the great hero of Iran. Everybody's so happy because of all the things that you have done for Iran, except me, your son. I've always suffered because of you. Very beautiful, very powerful words. And some said, okay, I surrender. You won. I stop here, right here. I do not want to kill them. I don't want to burn Kabul. But I cannot do that. It's your job. You go to the capital. You go talk to the king and see if you can convince him. And Zal goes to that mission. But meanwhile, there's a second person who decides to take action. And this is the person that you cannot believe. This is the beautiful beauty of Shahnameh. This person is not Rudabe, is not Mehrab, is Mehrab's wife, Sindukht. She's a very courageous person. First, Mehrab hears about this, hears about some coming to destroy the city and killing them. He's so upset. He blames Sindukht. He tells her that, okay, I'm going to kill you and my daughter to finish this story. I don't want to get killed. I don't want the people to get killed. I kill you guys. And Sindukht said, wait a minute, don't do that. Let me fix it. Give me all the jewelry, all the gold coins. Give me everything. I'll go talk to some myself. And she goes there. And she goes there and convinces some. And this part of the story is very beautiful as well. She first disguises herself. She doesn't say that I'm who I am. She goes there and tells her, oh, I'm a messenger from Mehrab. And I want you to please stop. Please don't kill. Please don't come to Kabul. And then Sam, when he listens to this courageous woman, he says that, wait a minute, this something's wrong. This is not a messenger. Why do even they send a woman as a messenger? And then he said that, okay, he removes everybody from the court. And then he said, okay, tell me the truth. If you tell me the truth, I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to stop. Not going to go there. But who are you? And what kind of girl is Rudabe? This is the second question that some asked. Some asked two questions. He asked first, who are you? What kind of relationship you have with this family? Because he knows that she's a noble person. And second thing is that, what kind of girl is this Rudabe that my son wants to marry? And this is the place that Sindukht reveals her identity. She says that I'm Rudabe's mom. I'm Mehrab's wife. If you want to kill me. Don't kill the people of Kabul. Kill me. I'm here. You want to kill? I'm the person to kill. And then some says, okay, don't worry. I'm not going to kill you. I don't want to kill you. And by the way, before revealing that, there's an interesting thing that Sindukht asks some. Says that, okay, I tell you my identity if you promise not to harm me or my family. And some says, okay. So in that sense, some has already promised not to hurt them without knowing who this lady is. But anyway, at the end, some said, then okay, I'm not going to do this. I'm fine with this marriage. But this is where Zal has gone to talk to the king. Let's see how it goes. And then based on that, hopefully he agrees. And back in the palace, Zal goes there to the palace and talks to the king. And king also sees him. He wants to give him his wish, especially because of a very emotional yet powerful letter that Sam writes and give it to Zal. Sam says, I've done so much for this country. and he tells the story of the fights that he has done, the war that he has, even the recent war that he has gone to, and he has killed a dragon in a sea. Why I'm saying this? Because this is very important. We have this story in our myths. We have this story as part of Avesta. It's not about Sam, it's about Krasaspa, Gershasp. But we know that Gershasp, Sam, and Narivan potentially were the same people in our ancient texts. But over the years, these were split into 3 different characters. So Sam, in fact, was the ancestor name of Gershasp. But now, today, we say that, oh, Sam was the son of Nariman. Nariman was the son of Gershasp. Even in some of the references, Nariman is a nephew of Gershas. It's not in Shahnameh. He's a nephew of Gershas. He's not even son of Gershas. So anyway, they believe that these 3 people were the same. So that's why when we hear about all these brave things that Sam has done, we have the references of Gershas doing that. But anyway, getting back to the story, when but in his letter, he says something very beautiful. These are the very nice touches of Ferdowsi. He says, my son was raised by a bird. He has not seen girls. He has seen one girl and fell in love. You give him a break. So you should do better. So he's fell in love. He doesn't know better. And Sam is a very interesting character in Shahnameh. He's kind of witty. So he's, for example, another part of this story, when he hears that his son wants to marry Rudabe, what he says is that, what kind of son is going to be born? What kind of child is going to be born from these 2 crazy dudes? One of them is the descendant of a dragon. The other one is raised by a bird. Oh my God, what kind of couple are these? This is what Sam says. Anyway, now Manucher reads this letter and says, okay, I would like to agree with this marriage. I'm fine with this. However, I need to test you to make sure that you're ready. And then he asked the wise people of his course, the Mubats, to test him. And this is a beautiful and less known part of this story. The story of these wise men testing Zal with their questions, with their quizzes. And in fact, this is the part that I made bold as part of my kids' book that I created. Also, it's in my audiobook as well. But in the third story of my basically books on Shahnameh, by the way, the 4th one is published. The 4th one was published 2 days ago. So you can find them on Amazon as well. So the 3rd one is the story of Zal and Rudabe. But I say that, yeah, these 2 fell in love, blah, blah, blah. I do not go too much into the details of that for kids. I go into that part, which these wise men ask these quizzes. I mentioned some of the quizzes for kids, so they guess and they can answer them. These are beautiful, very interesting quizzes. I suggest that you find them and try to solve them yourself. So one of them is, for example, there is a white horse and there's a black horse, and they follow each other, they chase each other, and they never reach each other. What is that? And the answer is, of course, day and night. White horse and black horse, and they're day and night, and they're chasing each other and never are together, never find each other. So there are cute puzzles like this that they ask, and of course, Zal answers them all. But Manager is impressed, he's very happy, but he says, oh, wait a minute, you also need to test how brave you are, how heroic you are, how good of a soldier you are. And then he asked the good soldiers or heroes of his court to challenge him, to fight with him and see how good it is. And he impresses everybody. And at the end, Manucher agrees with the marriage. And then there's a wedding, and that's also very beautiful. And I don't know if you have it in your wedding customs, that before seeing the bride or even just entering the house of the groom, the bride gets something, right? They pay. So usually the family, the father of the groom, pay the bride. Payment maybe just gold coin or something, but that's, I don't know if you have that. So Iranians do. So we have that in Shahnameh. So when Sam go and Zal go to Kabul, then he sees Sindocht. Sam knows Sindocht, right? They've met before. He sees her and tell her, come on, how long more do you want to hide your daughter? I want to see your daughter. And Sindocht said, that, oh, really? You want to see the bride? Where's the coin? They say that. So they have this exchange and something, oh, I'll give you whatever you want. Show her to me. And then he sees the bride, he sees Rudabe and gets amazed by her beauty. One of the interesting parts of Shahnameh is how beautiful Ferdowsi describes women. Beautiful women, beautiful words for describing Rudabe, even Sudabe, Tahmine, Gorda Farid. All of these are defined so beautifully. The most beautiful women you find in Shahnameh. Anyway, so after the wedding, of course, there's pregnancy, that famous hard pregnancy that Rudabe has, because the baby in her womb is giant, it's huge. You know why? Because it's Rostam. Rostam is about to be born, the greatest hero of Shahnameh. And I really don't want to cut this short. So if you don't mind, are you, let's cut short the question and answer part. So I spend maybe 5-10 more minutes. I really want to do this. So I hope that you have time or get come back and watch the recording because I want to finish this. Rostam is about to be born. And this is another wonderful thing that Ferdowsi does. And also, it's not just Ferdowsi. We need to give credit, obviously, to his reference as well. That he set the stage for the biggest hero of Iran to be born. How does he do that? In 3 different occasions before this birth, his coming is the news of his coming, the great hero coming, is given to important people. First to Sam. Sam, when hear that from Zal, that he was hear the story. Zal has not even come to his father. Father learns about this, and he thinks, "Oh, what should I do?" Actually, no. He hears it from himself, and then he said, "Okay, let me think about that." And he's so upset about this, and that's what the place that he said, "Oh, from this dragon descendant and this person raised by birth who is going to be born." And then he want to know that, and this is something that is very common in Shahnameh. The solutions are many times solved by astrology, by relying on the stars to see that what is the destiny or on the life of just a person, usually a person who is about to be born. And they do that, and the astrologers come back and say that, oh, be happy. It's going to be a great hero. The person who is going to be born from this marriage is going to be greatest of all. Sam is told that. We don't know that. We don't know that yet. We haven't seen Rostam. But this is the first time that we hear about it. And then Manucher does the same thing. When Manucher wants to agree with Zal, he does that also by relying on the wise men and astrologers to tell him about this this person who he is worried about. I told you about. He's worried that he want to take side with his mom's side and take his throne. But again, astrologers come back giving him the good news that he's going to be a great hero. This is the second time. And the third time is also interesting, is by Seymour. When Zal is sees that he's so desperate that his wife has this big baby in his belly and he cannot be born in a natural way. She even faints someday. She passes out from exhaustion. But then Zod remembers the feather of Seymour that Seymour had given to him, telling him that whenever you have problem, just burn this and I'll show up and help you. He burns that feather, and Seymour shows up and asks what's going on. And Zod tells the story, and Seymour said, don't worry about it. Your son is healthy, he's going to be born fine, and he's going to be a great hero. Third time, before Rostam is born. This is the way that the stage is set. That is the beauty of Shahnameh. So he gives instruction. The instruction is obviously cut the womb, cut the side of Rudabe, bring the baby out. So this is C-section, cesarean section, right? The operation is commonly named after Julius Caesar, but Iranians would like now to call it Rostam Zod. This is the way that Rostam was born. And this is the topic of my fourth book. My fourth book is the story of Rostam's birth. And at the end of that, I actually tell that. And the last page of the book, let me just show you the last page of the book, just for fun. So in the last page of the book, I show a modern operational room in which a baby is delivered with using C-section. I explain that what C-section is and tell that this is the way that Rostam was born, and that's why we can call it Rostam Zod. So let me share my screen. Do I have? Yeah, I can share the screen.
Yes, you are co-host.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you see that? Oh, I lost my Zoom. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, this is the fourth book. And so go to the end of it. This is the end. Here. See? Today, some babies are born via cesarean section, which is similar to the way that Rostam was born. That's why we can also call this procedure Rostam Zod, meaning the way Rostam was born. And we have the picture of Rostam here as well. Anyway, so this is the fourth book, which is online now. You can get it from Amazon. So Rostam is born. And this is the part, I told you all of that, first of all, because I wanted to continue the story of Shahnameh. But this is the other thing I wanted to mention about Shahnameh editing and Shahnameh editions. This is the point here. After Rostam is born, and it talks about how big it was, and then he ate a lot, and he was like a 10-year-old when he was 1, and things like that, all the exaggerations that were appropriate at that moment. And then we have 2 stories right in here at this part of the book. We says that one of them is the story of Rostam and the white elephant. I don't know, you can raise hand, right? So I would like you to raise hand if you have heard that story. Rostam killing, you can do that, yeah, digitally, you can do that. Rostam killing that white elephant. You might even have seen a picture of it, that many of the Shahnames have this picture. Rostam has a mace, and is actually his grandfather's mace, and he kills the elephant with that. So the story here is that everybody's drunk at home after celebration, and they were all in deep sleep at night in the palace of Zod. And then the white elephant of Zod breaks his chain and come and start just breaking things and destroying things. Rostam wakes up. He is maybe a 10-year-old. And then he gets his grandfather's mace and goes out and then hits the elephant in the head and kills the elephant. This is that famous story that many have heard. I've heard that at least a couple of you guys have heard it too. And then Zod comes out. He gets surprised and said, "What did you do? Oh my God, you should not have done this. because it's an elephant, so you are a kid. But then after that, he says something that is so unbelievable. Zal says that, wait a minute, you are actually pretty good. I want to send you on a mission. And that mission is to go and capture the fortress of Sepand. What is that a story? He says that there is a fortress and there are people living there, maybe nearby or somewhere. And these people are supposed to give us taxes. They don't. Your great-grandfather, who's that? Great-grandfather. I want to test you. This is one of the quiz. I want to give you a couple of quizzes today. Who's the great-grandfather of Rostam?
Keshas to Nariman?
Not Yashas.
Nariman, I mean?
Nariman.
Yeah.
Nariman is great-grandfather of Rostam.
Oh.
Rostam, Zal, Sam, and Nariman, according to Shahnameh. And this is the only place that we hear the story of Nariman. He says that Nariman, your great-grandfather, ages ago, went and tried to capture that fortress and then collect the taxes. But what they did was that they threw a big rock from the top of the fortress to their head and killed him. So this is the way that Nariman was killed. And then your grandfather Sam tried to do that, tried to capture, and he couldn't. He was there for a year or so, and he couldn't do that, and he gave up. But you seem to be a great hero. Go do that. Go capture. And he does that. He goes there and disguises himself as a salesperson. They let him in, and then he kills the guards and just captured blah blah blah, all the things that are obviously expected. He captures the fortress, and then he comes back with all the riches triumphantly. So there are two stories that I told you about. The story of killing the white elephant and then capturing the white fortress, the Sepand fortress. We know today that these two stories are additions to Shahnameh. They are not real. They are not part of Ferdowsi's words. This is one example I wanted to give you. I told you all of that story to tell you this. Why? There are evidences that come from manuscript. Not every manuscript has that. We have evidences from other places, maybe from Shahnameh Bondari. Bondari Eswani. Remember the translation of Shahnameh. That does not have that story. And other reasons for this. However, there is a logical reason. Many of the times we can have a logical reason for this, even though I told you that not to argue with not to be so logical with mythology. But this is different. The story, the different parts of the story should not be that contradictory. So after Manucher, his son Nozar is the king. And after that, Zav or Zotahmasp becomes the king. So I'm going to, hopefully next time I tell you about this story, because I know Faribors would say that what happened to Arash. I will tell you the Arash story too next time, I promise. So that is that's part of this story. But anyway, after Zotahmas or Zaftahmas dies, he's an 85 years old man and he dies. So he just reigns for 5 years and dies. And after him, the throne is vacant. Then they want a king. They're looking for a king to replace him. And then all the heroes of Iran go to Zal and ask him for help. And Zal says that I'm old. I no longer can do this. But my son might be able to. Listen to this. He says that my son might be able to, even though he's still a kid. He's still a kid. And one word that he's used, he said his mouth smells formula, smells milk. So he is so young. Yeah, so obviously it's just metaphorical. So he said that he's young, but he might be up to it. So let me talk to him. And then he talks to Rustam, says that, my son, you are still a kid. I don't want to send you to such a mission, to war. But if you're up to it, go for it. And Rustam says that, don't worry about it. I would like to go to war. I would like to go to missions. And remember that? Zal says that I don't want to send you. Come on, you've sent it to capture the place that your great grandfather couldn't do. Right? No. So that's one obvious reason that those stories were additions. They were not really stories from Shahnameh. They were from some other places. Somebody wrote it and added them. But there are other reasons as well. But one of the reasons that usually arguments other people like Dr. Khalegi make when he wants to decide whether a story is real or not, is that he counts the Arabic words in it. Some of the stories have too many Arabic words in them, showing them that they could not be from Ferdowsi's time, could be much later by somebody who was not as committed to using Persian words as Ferdowsi was. Remember, Shahnameh has Arabic words, but very few of them. But when you see a story that has too many of them, you might become suspicious of it. And this is one of those. Anyway, so I want to stop here. I just gave you one example of stories that are added to Shahnameh. I have a very good one again from later in Shahnameh that I'm going to tell you as part of the narration of Shahnameh stories next time. So next time I have a Herculean task to wrap things up for you. I'll do my best. I cannot cover many things, but I'll do as much as I can. Thanks for your patience. I know that it's way over time. Let me ask you a couple of quizzes before answering your questions. One I asked you about Nariman. So tell me about the three reasons that the three main reasons that people add things to Shahnameh or make changes to Shahnameh. Let's put it that way. Make changes to Shahnameh.
Can I try?
Sure. Go ahead. Go for it, Mark.
One is ideology.
Yeah.
Which is the most important one.
Mhm.
Then you have emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember the first one.
Who else can say that? Katie and Freddie.
Sorry, updating the book. Some of the words are old and not contemporary after 1,000 years a while, you know.
Exactly, but not after 1,000 years. Remember that some of these changes were done 200, 300 after.
Whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So who can give me an example of an emotional addition? What does that even mean?
Additions to make it more dramatic.
Mm-hmm. Like what? When? Freddie?
I like Rostam crying after killing Sohrab. I think that was added to a great extent. And you said something more about the same in the Rostam's stories. The emotions that are expressed in the stories were probably added more than what they were originally.
Yeah. So I give you another example as well. So one is, for example, crying over his son. What was the other one? Anyone else? About bragging in front of his rival when they are at war. So this is pretty common. And Shahnameh does that a lot. When two rivals want to start the war, they first start bragging about themselves and basically inferior in the other side. So it's basically telling them, oh, you're nothing and I'm great. And they do that a lot, and they do that very beautifully, actually, very shrewd way. The best of it is in Rostam and Esfandiar. So the story of Rostam and Esfandiar is not about Rostam killing Esfandiar with just that single arrow. It's not about that. It's about so many things that are in the development of that story. And the best part is the conversations between Rostam and Esfandiar. So by the way, so I'm telling you some of that story. First, when these two meet each other in the first few encounters, they praise each other. Esfandiar says that, oh, you are a great hero of Iran. You've done this, you've done that, you've done that. And your father and your grandfather, you are awesome. please come with me. Please let me tie your hand. And on the other hand, Rostam says that, oh, you're great. So you are the son of King Goshtas. You are coming from all these great kings. You are the ruler. Your family were the rulers. You were awesome. That's what Rostam says to begin with. But then afterwards, when things are heat up and they see that, okay, there is no other solution than to just fight, then they start scolding each other. Sfandior says that, oh, you're nothing. So your father was raised by bird. He even says that, makes these kind of assaults. Or your family comes from Zahak, or something like that. And then he says also some bad things about Isfandiar as well. So these are the conversations which are written so powerfully by Ferdowsi. So these are the words that makes this story one of perhaps the greatest, or maybe the greatest story of Shahnameh, Rustam and Isfandiar. Rustam and Isfandiar, Rustam and Sohrab. These two are greatest stories of Shahnameh, and of course the story of Siyavesh. But what makes them great is not just the story, which of course is very dramatic, is also the developments and these all encounters between these characters. Anyway, so these were my quizzes. So thank you so much. So there are some questions here. Let me just read them. Let me keep the recording going to include the chats too. So Mr. Mirza, this is for you. So
yes, we will continue recording the question and answers. So go right ahead, please.
I think last time it was cut off before the chats or something. So we got interesting questions coming up in chat with answers. So
yeah, especially because I was abused the chat part as well, and I say some of the things there. So yeah, I agree. Ferdowsi's story of creation, is it evolution or creation that he talks about?
My belly. Oh, I'm not asking.
Hi, Arya. Go ahead. Oh, so it's not you. Sorry. Fireburst, you were asking that question. So Ferdowsi's story of creation absolutely is not about evolution. So I was in that talk that you were, Fireburst, in Vancouver. So I do not believe in that. I actually talked about that at some point. So there are things that you can see, like about the brainwashing that I said last time. So when Maruch asked whether the Zahak just eating the brain of you means brainwashing, I said that, okay, this is just contemporary interpretation. This is not something that anybody said. But now, believing that evolution, which was something that was very recent, by recent I mean that the entire scope of history, which is about 1850 or something like that. It was just Darwin came with the evolution. But by the way, so it's not about evolution necessarily, about the Big Bang that was in that talk, which was saying that, okay, if you read the introduction to Shahnameh, it talks about Big Bang, because it say, oh, it was a light, and then after, but this and that. But no, these are the very developments in the recent developments from in the 20th century theories. So believing that, okay, Ferdowsi knew about this 1,000 years ago, no, it's just a myth. However, and also about evolution, and you say he clearly talks about Qumars being the first who collected the animals and humans together. He never says that humans come from animal. And even in the introduction, he talks about this. So God first created this and that and that and that, and then human. He talks about that. So this is completely a creational view into life, not the evolutionary one, for sure. All right, thanks so much for yet another very interesting lecture. Looking forward to more on Sunday. Unfortunately, I have another function. Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Freddie.
Thank you.
Bye. All right. Anybody else has anything to say? I can still stay for a few more minutes.
Yeah, I just have a little question. Like, I don't understand that maybe Ferdowsi has overlap between the Peshdadian and the Kianian dynasties in telling the stories of Rustam, and because at one point we discussed Minochehr and Eraj and Nausar, who were like Peshdadian kings, right? And another point we discussed Kai Gushtas, his son Asfandyar and his Gushtas telling Asfandyar to get Rustam in chains back to the court, right?
Yeah.
Now, this guy Gushtas and all these kings were from the Kianian dynasty. I agree that these were prehistoric times and we don't have exact dates for these dynasties, but like, doesn't it look like Ferdowsi has overlap between the two dynasties, or sort of like mixed up while telling the stories? Because
why mixed up?
In those days, actually, these dynasties were pretty long. Like one reign of one king was like maybe hundreds of years. Although these were prehistoric times and we don't have the dates. But here we have a couple of group of kings who are in the Pishtarian dynasty, then other who are in the Kianian dynasty, and we have Rustam and Sohrab and his family being discussed. So how can they be divided between two dynasties? Like,
I see what you're saying.
Periods.
I see what you're saying. Let me just clarify one thing. That's what Ferdowsi did not distinguish this. This is our way of distinguishing these two dynasties. There is no such a thing saying that, okay, it started from this, ended this. So we don't have such a notion. As I mentioned, even in Avesta, what we know as Pishdad is only Hushang. It's not even his descendants. Hushang is called Pishdad. But since it started from Hushang, just putting Qumars aside, we said that, okay, these are the kings who come after Hushang, they're descendants of Hushang, up to the point that Zav Tahmas dies and he has nobody to replace him. And Keyqubad is brought from Mount Elborz by Rustam. And then it said that, and since his name was also start with Keyqubad, and then we have Keyqubus and Keykhosro, we do not have K before the name of the previous one. We said that, okay, these are Kianians. But even when we reach Bahman and Homai and the Arab, these do not even have the name K in them. So, but still, we put them together at one bucket. We said, tell them. But this is a chain that I mentioned that before. That this is the beauty of Shahnameh, that narrates is in a one line story from the beginning to the end, and all of these are chained together. So that's why at the time of Esfandyar, if you look at it, putting the long life of Rustam aside, which I gave you some reasoning about it last time, so this is just a connection of all of these, and Esfandyar, of course, can refer to all the previous kings because they come one after another. So it's kind of natural, even though it should be way old. The first thing was Esfandyar should say, wait a minute, how could you live for 700 years? But I don't see any contradiction in that, any chance. So we have some part of Shahnameh which are completely at odds. I'm going to talk about them next time when I talk about the story of Arash the archer, Arash Kamangir. That's one of those mysterious part of Shahnameh, and Ferdowsi got it kind of wrong to some extent, even though, again, we should not blame Ferdowsi, maybe his reference, but I'll talk about that next time. But in this one, I do not see much of an issue. All right. Thank you, Maro.
Thank you.
Afshin, this is more of an observation that I'm finding, and I want you to just clarify whether I'm on the right track. This is regarding the poetry that Ferdowsi wrote, and most of these are metaphorical, correct? And when you talk about different ideologies that have impacted Ferdowsi's work over the years, this is also open to interpretation. We also see that in the Gathas, correct? It's all in the poetry form, and the metaphors that exist even in those scriptures, it's open to interpretation, whoever tries to read them and understand. So I think I can understand that how Ferdowsi's work has changed over a period of time. So it was just an observation that I'm finding, that I may look at a metaphor in a very different way than someone else. So perhaps the root of Ferdowsi's Shahnameh had its roots, even though it's Iranian culture, very strong, what you've mentioned, it has its roots in the Zoroastrianism. But over the years, due to this ideology and interpretation of this manuscript, it's become more Islamic in nature.
I don't think it's Islamic in nature. I never said it's Islamic in nature.
No, I'm not saying you are saying.
No. I agree with your interpretation. That is more Zoroastrian than Islamic. It's not Islamic. Absolutely not. I mentioned that even last time, so it seems that I need to repeat this. So somebody says that, okay, so Ferdowsi talks about the Zoroastrian beliefs. I said that probably, and is very close to it. However, it may not necessarily come from the religion directly. It may come from a culture of people who were raised in generations in that culture.
Correct.
But nobody says, except just a few obviously Islamists, nobody says that Shahnameh is about the Islamic culture. It's not. Absolutely not. Shahnameh is about the pre-Islamic culture. And that obviously is rooted in Zoroastrianism. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, and the other thing I have, I just want to make a comment on the stories that you're writing for the children. I think it's a great idea. I know my grandfather used to read us stories of Rustam and Sohrab, and he would tell us all the stories. The story, this love story about Ruda Bey and Zal, I think is the most beautifully written. I totally agree. Is it true that one of the things that Ruda Bey did when Zal came to visit him, that she let down her hair was so long,
yes,
and he climbed using the strand, the braid, and he got up. So that reminds me of a story, Rumpelstiltskin. Which one was that? Rapunzel.
yeah.
The Grimm's fairy tale. So I'm wondering, as you write these stories, perhaps these are the stories we should tell our children, because they've grown up with Rapunzel and all that. Reminds me of that. So there you go.
I have that.
You have that, and that's in your third edition?
It's in the third one.
Okay, I should get that. Yes, but those are the stories that I really would love to, relate to our children. So anyway, just thought I'd make a comment.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is why I'm telling these stories. So the idea behind this is that we have all these good stories for children. Yes. Shahnameh is not all violent. So we have these beautiful stories that can teach our kids good lessons, first of all, and then they make them familiar with Shahnameh, with the soft side of Shahnameh as a kid, so they relate to this book, so that when they grow up, they would like to learn more about it. So imagine with these books, my goal is that even the 5-6-year-old know about Rostam. So even though Rostam goes to war, but we have some part of Rostam's story, like Rostam's birth. Then my next book 5, is a spoiler alert, is about the story of Rostam picking his horse. That is also a beautiful story. And it's not violent. It's about the story of Rostam picking his horse. I'm going to tell that story. So for children to be familiar with these characters. Oh, now, by the way, yeah, that one, not 5. Number 6 is the book of Rostam going to Mount Alborz to bring Keyqoba to make him the king. Again, this is not violent. It's a beautiful story. So I would like them to get exposed to Shahnameh and love it, and then try to just go for it and just learn more about it. So this is the way that I think it should be. So we should teach our kids about Shahnameh since young age. That's what I do. All right. Thank you so much.
My father also used to tell us the story of Rustam and Sohrab and others after we had Dansak on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah. Even though in today's standard, we should not tell that story to a young kid. I remember that my daughter, who narrated those stories, it was a point where I think somebody mentioned this. She was at that point, I think maybe even 12, and she liked Rostam. She had the story of Rostam. She told the story of Rostam. And then she heard about this. She got shocked. And I saw tears in her eyes saying that, oh my God, really? Rostam kills his son? So yeah. So she was not ready for it. So yeah, maybe we need to not tell that story to Kinu. By the way, so when I remember this, so there is a video, again, is in Persian. So, and that's very powerful. It's just a gentleman, is very recent, maybe 5 years ago. A gentleman tells the story of Rostam and Sohrab the same way. He says, he has basically a poem. He says that in poetry. He says that when my son came to me and told him that, okay, Rostam and Sohrab, what's the story of Rostam and Sohrab? I would like to know that. And then I was thought to myself, okay, how can I tell that story to my kids? It's the exact same experience that I had. So how can I tell him that Rustam killed Sohrab? And then, and he said that my son heard about it. I said, that why Rustam killed Sohrab? And he said, that I didn't know how to answer that. And then he says that I had a dream on that night. And then Rustam came in my dream and he asked me, and I asked him that, Rustam, the great hero of Iran, why did you kill your son? He said that all in poetry. This gentleman, is beautiful poetry that he says. He's just fantastic. And he says that I killed him not out of hate. I did not kill my son because of hatred or even not knowing. I knew he was my son. This is what he says. He said, I knew what his son. But the first time, we know that they fight twice, right? This is again one of the things that make this story emotional and beautiful. The first time, Sohrab and Rostam do wrestling, and Sohrab throw Rostam on the ground, and then he want to kill him, and then Rostam deceives him, tricks him, telling that, oh, wait a minute, do you know about our custom? He said, wait a minute, what custom? He said, oh, if a young person just defeats an older person in the fight, in the battle, or in wrestling, the first time, he does not kill that.
Yeah.
He does not kill him. He does that the second time if he can. This way, he survives. And then the next time, obviously, he does not give Sohrab any chance to have any kind of argument or anything. The first act, as soon as he becomes on top, he just put the dagger in him, right? But what this gentleman says is that when the first time Sohrab lifted me up, I was on top, and then when I view the camp of Iranians, I saw Derafsh Kavian. I saw the flag of Iran upside down. It was about Iran. I could not see that, because you know that story. Sohrab had come to Iran as an enemy. He was fighting Iran. He said that I could not see that flag being thrown on the ground by this big guy, but this big hero. So that's why I killed him, even though I knew he was son. It was because of Iran. This is the narration of this gentleman, which is very beautiful. So anyway, so I don't know why I said that, so I don't even remember the question anymore. All right. Thank you so much. It's 2 hours now, and I really appreciate all the dedication. So